The silence of the forest was mocking me, amplifying the echo of their laughter as the taillights of their car disappeared down the mountain road. The air was thick with the scent of pine and betrayal, a bitter cocktail I knew I would be drinking for a long time. They had left me, stranded, 16 years old and utterly alone in the wilderness, a place they swore would bring us closer. They were wrong, so very wrong. If your family is everything to you, subscribe now to hear stories of unbreakable bonds and the price some pay to shatter them. My mother always romanticized the outdoors. Growing up in the suburbs, she'd fill our weekends with hikes, camping trips, and nature documentaries, always painting this idyllic picture of self-sufficiency and bonding with nature. My dad, a practical man, tolerated it for a while, but eventually the trips became fewer and the arguments about them louder. I was always caught in the middle, wanting to please both of them, yearning for that connection my mother promised, but never quite delivered. When she announced this special camping trip, just the two of us, a mother-daughter bonding experience, I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, this would be different. Maybe this would be the turning point. We packed the car, my mom humming her favorite folk songs, and drove for hours into the heart of the Redwood National Forest. The towering trees, ancient and silent, initially filled me with awe, but a creeping unease began to settle in as we ventured deeper into the woods, further away from civilization. The first few days were normal. We hiked, cooked meals over the campfire, and even had a few genuine conversations. "Nicole," my mother said, "you're growing into such a strong woman." It sounded rehearsed, but I brushed it off, desperate to believe in the sincerity of the moment. Then came the morning that shattered everything. I volunteered to gather firewood, eager to contribute and feeling a sense of accomplishment as I piled branches in my arms. As I approached the campsite, I heard voices, my mother's and a man's. I didn't recognize the man, but the words I heard him say cut deeper than any axe. The words, like shards of glass, pierced through the fragile bubble of hope I'd been clinging to. "Can't do this anymore, David. She suspects nothing. Once she's gone, we can finally be together. I'm tired of playing this part." Gone? I stumbled back, dropping the firewood with a loud crash that seemed to echo the shattering of my world. My mother emerged from the tent, her face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and calculation. The man, David, stepped out behind her, his expression hard and unapologetic. They stared at me, frozen in a tableau of betrayal. "Nicole, it's not what you think," my mother stammered, but the lie hung heavy in the air, suffocating any chance of reconciliation. That's when they told me. They were leaving. David had bought a plot of land in Montana, a new life waiting for them. They couldn't take me, they said. It would complicate things. I was old enough to take care of myself. The bus station was only 30 miles away, they assured me, as if that made it any better. As if abandoning your 16-year-old daughter in the middle of nowhere was a minor inconvenience. I pleaded, I begged, I cried. I reminded her of all the promises she'd made, all the dreams we'd shared, that her eyes were cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. David just stood there, arms crossed, a silent enforcer of her cruelty. They packed their things, their movements quick and efficient, as if they'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. They threw my backpack out of the tent, containing a few changes of clothes, a half-eaten bag of chips, and a crumpled $20 bill. "Good luck, Nicole," my mother said, her voice flat and emotionless. The engine roared to life and the car sped away, leaving me standing alone in the dust, the silence of the forest amplifying the hollowness in my chest. The first night was the worst. Fear, raw and primal, gnawed at me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent jolts of terror through my body. The temperature plummeted, and I huddled in my sleeping bag, shivering uncontrollably, the flimsy fabric offering little protection against the cold. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying the scene over and over again, searching for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of this madness. But there was none, only the cold, hard reality of my abandonment. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a sliver of determination began to emerge from the depths of my despair. I wouldn't let them break me. I would survive.
I would make them pay. I started walking, following the faint trail that led back to civilization. My legs ached, my stomach growled, and my throat was parched, but I kept moving, fueled by a burning rage that grew with every step. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small town. Exhausted and desperate, I went to the local police station, hoping they would help me. I told them everything about the camping trip, the affair, the abandonment. The officer listened patiently, his expression sympathetic, but his words offered little comfort. He explained that since I was 16, I wasn't considered a missing person. My mother had the right to leave me, as awful as it sounded. He offered to contact Child Protective Services, but I refused. I didn't want to be a charity case. I wanted justice, not pity. I spent the next few weeks bouncing between shelters and odd jobs, trying to scrape together enough money to survive. I worked as a waitress, a cleaning lady, even a gas station attendant, enduring long hours and meager pay. The humiliation was constant, but I refused to give up. Every dollar I earned was a step closer to my goal. The burning anger kept me warm. It was my food.
It was my shelter. Sleep became a luxury. Night after night, I tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of my mother's betrayal. But amidst the torment, a plan began to take shape. It was still vague, a mere whisper of an idea, but it grew stronger with each passing day. I started collecting information, piecing together the details of my mother's new life. I found out where they lived, where David worked, what kind of car they drove. Social media became my weapon of choice. I created fake profiles, infiltrating their online world, gathering intelligence, and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The waiting was the hardest part. It required patience, discipline, and a level of self-control I didn't know I possessed. There were times when I wanted to confront them, to scream at them, to demand an explanation. But I resisted the urge, knowing that premature action would jeopardize everything. I had to be smart, strategic, and ruthless. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with it. But they were wrong. I was coming for them, and when I did, they would regret the day they ever crossed me. The forest may have silenced my cries, but it had also forged my resolve. They had created a monster. They thought they had ended me, when in fact they birthed my revenge. The injustice was a heavy weight, pressing down on me, fueling my obsession. I saw their faces everywhere, in every crowd, in every reflection. They had stolen my life, my family, my sense of security, and I would make them pay tenfold. I was no longer the naive, trusting girl they had abandoned. I was a survivor, hardened by adversity, and driven by a singular purpose, to exact my revenge. The weeks bled into months, each day a monotonous cycle of survival. The anger, once a roaring fire, began to dwindle into a smoldering ember, threatening to extinguish completely. Doubt crept in, whispering insidious questions in the dead of night. Was I strong enough? Was I smart enough? Was this revenge even worth sacrificing my own life for? One particularly brutal winter evening, after being fired from yet another dead-end job, I found myself standing on a bridge, staring down at the dark, swirling water below. The wind howled, mimicking the turmoil within me. The city lights blurred into distorted streaks, mirroring the fractured state of my soul. It would be so easy, I thought, to just let go, to surrender to the darkness and end the pain. No more struggle, no more betrayal, no more empty nights. A single step was all it would take. The abyss beckoned, promising oblivion. As I leaned further over the railing, a flicker of memory ignited within me. My mother's face, contorted with cold indifference, David's smug, self-satisfied smirk, and something inside me snapped. No, I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me. The darkness was tempting, yes, but the thought of them living their perfect life while I lay forgotten in the cold river, it was unbearable. A surge of defiance coursed through me, pushing back the despair. They wanted me gone? Fine. I would disappear, but not in the way they expected. I would become a ghost, a shadow, a force they couldn't see coming. The bridge swayed beneath my feet, but my resolve was solid. I straightened my back, took a deep breath of the frigid air, and walked away from the edge. The river continued to flow, uncaring and indifferent, but I was no longer drawn to its depths. I had a purpose, a mission, and I wouldn't rest until it was accomplished. The pity I felt began to subside. As I walked away from that bridge, I left a piece of myself behind, the broken, vulnerable girl who had been abandoned in the forest. In her place stood something new, something harder, something colder. I needed a new identity. The shelters and gas stations and gas station bathrooms would not do. I started by cutting my hair, chopping off the long blonde locks that reminded me too much of my mother. I dyed what was left a dark, almost black color. I invested in clothes that were cheap, nondescript, blending into the background of whatever new town I found myself in. I stopped using my real name, adopting a series of aliases, each one a disposable mask. I studied people, learning their habits, their mannerisms, their vulnerabilities. I became a chameleon, adapting to any environment, slipping in and out of roles with ease. The internet became my classroom. I learned about hacking, surveillance, and social engineering. I devoured books on psychology, manipulation, and deception. I practiced my skills, honing my ability to lie, to persuade, to control. Each successful act fueled me. The game had changed. I was no longer merely surviving. I was learning to hunt. One day, while browsing through an online forum, I stumbled across a thread about data recovery. Someone was asking for help retrieving deleted files from a damaged hard drive. An idea sparked in my mind. I spent weeks researching data forensics, learning how to recover lost information, how to trace digital footprints, how to uncover hidden secrets. It was complex and challenging, but I was determined to master it. This was more than just a skill. It was a weapon, and I intended to use it. They thought they had erased me from their lives. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they were wrong. Everything leaves a trace, and I was going to find it. The anger hadn't vanished. It had mutated. It was no longer a blind rage, but a cold, calculated fury, channeled into a laser-like focus. I would become their nightmare. They would learn what it meant to truly lose everything, and I would be the one to take it all away. The world would know their deeds. I would make sure of it.
The knowledge of data recovery became my obsession. I practiced on discarded computers, resurrecting lost photos, retrieving deleted emails, and uncovering hidden documents. I learned about file systems, encryption, and the subtle art of leaving no trace. Each successful recovery was a victory, a step closer to exposing my mother and David. I knew that their past held secrets, and I was determined to unearth them. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about justice. They needed to be held accountable for their actions. As I delved deeper into the digital world, I realized the power of information. It could be used to manipulate, control, and destroy, and I was becoming a master of it. I needed money for specialized software and equipment. I found a lucrative side hustle offering data recovery services to businesses, promising confidentiality and discretion. The irony was not lost on me. I was using my skills to help others protect their secrets while simultaneously preparing to expose my own mother's. The risks were high, but the potential reward was even greater. One afternoon, while working on a particularly challenging case, I stumbled upon a loophole in a popular social media platform's security protocol. It allowed me to access private messages and photos without leaving a trace. This was a game changer. If I could gain access to my mother's accounts, I could find the evidence I needed to expose their affair and their plans to abandon me. The temptation was overwhelming. I knew it was risky, illegal even, but I couldn't resist. I spent days studying the platform's code, identifying vulnerabilities, and crafting my exploit. It was like solving a complex puzzle, each piece fitting perfectly into place. Finally, the moment arrived. I launched my attack, my heart pounding in my chest. The code executed flawlessly, bypassing the security measures and granting me access to my mother's account. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a surge of adrenaline. I was in. I started sifting through her messages, photos, and posts, searching for any mention of David, any hint of their plan. Most of it was mundane, updates about her job, pictures of her friends, the usual social media drivel. But then I found it, a series of encrypted messages exchanged with David, detailing their affair, their plans to move to Montana, and their arrangements for leaving me behind. The messages were damning, irrefutable proof of their betrayal. I copied everything, making multiple backups, ensuring that the evidence would never be lost.
I also found something else, a series of financial transactions, revealing that my mother had been embezzling money from her employer for years. This was even better than I had hoped for. Not only could I expose their affair, but I could also bring her down for her crimes. The pieces were falling into place.
I felt a surge of power, a sense of control I hadn't experienced since that day in the forest. They thought they were untouchable, that they could get away with anything, but they were about to learn that no one is above the law. I printed out the messages and financial records, creating a physical dossier of their crimes. I needed to be careful. I couldn't risk being traced. I purchased a prepaid phone and a burner laptop, using public Wi-Fi networks to avoid detection. I even started wearing disguises, changing my appearance to further obscure my identity. The paranoia was constant, but I knew it was necessary. They were dangerous people, and I couldn't underestimate them. I also started to research the laws regarding abandonment and child neglect. I learned that while it was difficult to prosecute a parent for abandoning a 16-year-old, there were still legal avenues I could pursue, especially given the evidence of their premeditation. The more I learned, the more confident I became. I was ready. The next step was to gather evidence against David. I knew he was working as a real estate agent in Montana, and I suspected that he was involved in some shady dealings. I started investigating his transactions, scrutinizing his clients, and searching for any signs of fraud or misconduct. It took weeks of painstaking research, but eventually I found it. A pattern of inflated property values, hidden commissions, and falsified loan applications. David was running a sophisticated real estate scam, preying on unsuspecting homebuyers. I documented everything, compiling a detailed report with supporting evidence. I also discovered that David had a history of violence. He had been arrested several times for domestic abuse, but the charges had always been dropped, presumably due to his connections and influence. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I had everything I needed to destroy them both. But I couldn't act rashly. I had to time my attack perfectly, ensuring maximum impact. I decided to wait for the right opportunity, a moment when they were at their most vulnerable. In the meantime, I continued to build my skills, honing my abilities and preparing for any eventuality. I knew that this was going to be a long and difficult battle, but I was determined to see it through. I had come too far to turn back now. Their empire would crumble. I would orchestrate the fall. I began sending anonymous tips to the authorities, alerting them to my mother's embezzlement and David's real estate fraud. I made sure to provide enough evidence to pique their interest, but not so much that they could trace the information back to me. I wanted them to investigate on their own, to uncover the truth for themselves. It was a slow and methodical process, but I knew it was the safest way to proceed.
The waiting was agonizing, but I remained patient, trusting that my plan would eventually come to fruition. One evening, while monitoring my mother's social media account, I saw a post announcing their engagement. They were planning a lavish wedding in Montana, inviting all their friends and family. This was it. This was the perfect opportunity to strike. I decided to leak the evidence to the media, exposing their crimes to the world just days before their wedding. The scandal would be devastating, ruining their reputation and destroying their lives. I carefully crafted a press release outlining my mother's embezzlement, David's real estate fraud, and their abandonment of me. I included copies of the encrypted messages, the financial records, and the police reports, ensuring that the media had all the information they needed to verify my claims. I then created a series of anonymous email accounts and sent the press release to dozens of news outlets, both local and national. I also posted the information on several online forums and social media platforms, ensuring that it would reach a wide audience. The wedding was Saturday. I pressed send on Thursday. The anticipation was palpable. The air crackled with the promise of impending doom. I knew that once the information went public, there would be no turning back. But I was ready. I had waited long enough. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The countdown had begun. Now I just had to wait for the fireworks. I imagined them standing at the altar, ready to exchange vows when the news broke. The look on their faces, the shock, the horror, the realization that their perfect life was about to come crashing down around them. It was a beautiful thought. The next 48 hours were a blur of nervous energy and restless anticipation. I barely slept, glued to my laptop, refreshing news websites and social media feeds. I saw nothing.
Thursday crawled by. I started to panic. Had my message not reached them? Was it buried under the endless stream of online noise? Or worse, had they somehow intercepted it and were already preparing their defense? Doubt gnawed at me, whispering insidious questions in my ear. Maybe I had overestimated the impact of my evidence. Maybe they were too powerful, too well connected. Maybe I was just wasting my time. As Friday morning dawned, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I had poured everything into this plan, sacrificing my time, my energy, my very identity, and now it seemed like it was all for nothing. I was about to give up hope when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on the link, and there it was, a headline screaming about a Montana real estate mogul caught in a massive fraud scheme. My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled down the page, devouring every word.
The article detailed David's fraudulent activities, citing anonymous sources and providing concrete evidence of his misconduct. It also mentioned his upcoming wedding, hinting at further revelations to come. I felt a surge of triumph course through me. It had worked. My message had been received. The game was on. I continued to monitor the news throughout the day, watching as the story spread like wildfire. More news outlets picked it up, adding their own investigations and analyses. The comment sections exploded with outrage, demanding justice and calling for David's arrest. By Friday evening, the story had gone viral, trending on every social media platform. David's reputation was in tatters, his career in ruins, but the best was yet to come. I knew that once the story about my mother's embezzlement broke, the wedding would be called off, their lives would be irrevocably shattered. I waited, my fingers hovering over the send button, ready to unleash the final blow. Then, another notification. This time, it was an article about my mother, accusing her of stealing millions of dollars from her employer. The article included copies of the financial records I had provided, as well as statements from former colleagues and investigators. The story was even more explosive than I had anticipated. The article called her a heartless manipulator. It mentioned her upcoming wedding to a Montana real estate agent, hinting at a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. The internet erupted. People were furious, disgusted, and hungry for more. I watched in satisfaction as their perfect world crumbled before their eyes. I felt a sense of vindication, a sense of justice finally being served. But my work wasn't finished yet. I still had one more card to play. I had saved the most damaging evidence for last, the encrypted messages detailing their plan to abandon me. I waited until the evening, when I knew that the news coverage would be at its peak. Then I leaked the messages to a select group of journalists, along with a brief statement outlining my story. I explained how my mother and David had conspired to leave me in the forest, how they had planned to start a new life together in Montana, and how I had spent years plotting my revenge. I painted a picture of betrayal, abandonment, and cold-blooded calculation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The journalists were shocked, outraged, and eager to share my story with the world. Within hours, my name was trending on social media, along with the hashtags Justice for Orphan and Montana Betrayal. People were rallying behind me, praising my courage and condemning my mother and David's actions. The wedding was canceled. The venue had issued a statement disavowing any association with the couple. The caterers, the florists, the photographers, everyone was pulling out. Their dream wedding had turned into a public relations nightmare. I imagined them huddled together in their luxury home, watching the news coverage in horror, their faces pale with fear. They were trapped. There was no escape. But that was just the beginning. I knew that once the authorities got involved, things would get much worse for them. The FBI had already launched an investigation into my mother's embezzlement. The Montana State Police were investigating David's real estate fraud, and I had no doubt that they would soon be facing charges for abandonment and child neglect. Their lives were ruined, their reputations were destroyed, and it was all thanks to me. I felt a surge of power, a sense of control I had never experienced before. I had taken everything from them, just as they had taken everything from me. The score was settled, or so I thought. As I was celebrating my victory, I received a strange message from an anonymous source. It was a single line of text. "They know it was you." My blood ran cold. How could they know? I had taken every precaution, covered my tracks, and used multiple aliases. Had I made a mistake? Had I underestimated them? Or were they just bluffing, trying to scare me? I didn't know, but I couldn't take any chances. I immediately shut down my computer, destroyed my burner phone, and packed my bags. I had to disappear, to vanish without a trace. They were dangerous people, and I knew that they wouldn't hesitate to come after me. I had to get out of there, to find a new identity, a new life. But where could I go? Who could I trust? I felt a sense of panic rising within me. I was being hunted, and I didn't know who was chasing me. I grabbed my backpack, threw in a few essentials, and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, I noticed a black car parked across the street. It was nondescript, anonymous, but something about it felt wrong. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, hesitating. Was I being paranoid, or was this really happening? I decided to take a chance. I turned around, walked back inside, and locked the door. I couldn't run. I had to face them, to confront them, to end this once and for all. I grabbed a kitchen knife, hid it behind my back, and waited. The car was still there, its headlights gleaming in the darkness. The engine revved, and then the car started to move, slowly, deliberately, heading straight for my apartment. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the final showdown. The engine roared, the headlights blinding as the black car accelerated, hurtling directly towards my apartment building. There was no time to think, only react. I yanked the door open a fraction of a second before impact, the force of the car slamming into the wall beside it. Wood splintered, brick crumbled, and the entire building shuddered. I used the momentary chaos to my advantage, darting out the back door and into the alleyway, the kitchen knife clutched tightly in my hand. I knew they wouldn't give up. They were cornered animals, desperate and dangerous. I had to disappear, to become a ghost. I navigated the labyrinthine alleyways, my senses on high alert, listening for any sign of pursuit. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every noise sent my heart racing. I knew I couldn't stay in the city. They had too many resources, too many connections. I needed to get away, to find a place where I could disappear completely. I made my way to the train station, buying a ticket to a small town in the middle of nowhere, a place where no one would ever look for me. As the train pulled away from the station, I glanced back at the city, a sense of closure washing over me. I was leaving the past behind, shedding my old identity, and embracing a new future. The next few months were a blur of anonymity and solitude. I found a small cabin in the woods, far from civilization, and lived a simple life, focusing on survival and self-sufficiency. I learned to hunt, to fish, to grow my own food. I spent my days hiking, exploring, and reading, trying to find peace and solace in the natural world. Slowly, gradually, the fear and paranoia began to subside. I started to heal, to rebuild my life, to find a sense of purpose again. But I never forgot what they had done to me. I knew that one day I would have to confront them, to demand justice for their crimes. Then one day, a newspaper arrived at the tiny general store. There, on the front page, was a story about my mother and David. They had both been arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The article detailed their crimes, their betrayal, and their downfall. It also mentioned my role in exposing them, painting me as a victim who had bravely fought back against injustice. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I read the article, a sense of vindication that I had longed for. They had finally paid the price for their actions. Their lives were in ruins, their reputations destroyed, and their freedom taken away. I imagined their faces, contorted with rage and despair, as they sat in their jail cells, knowing that they had been defeated.
But the story didn't end there. The article also revealed that David had been involved in a hit-and-run incident several years prior, an incident that had resulted in the unaliving of a young woman. The police had reopened the case, and David was now facing charges for vehicular unaliving. It turned out that the black car that had tried to run me over was linked to that past crime. It was poetic justice. Their world had crumbled. They would spend years behind bars, and they'd never know peace. The crimson on their hands was impossible to wash off. I returned to my cabin, a sense of closure washing over me. I had achieved my revenge, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had expected. Instead, I felt a deep sense of sadness, a realization that their actions had forever changed me, that I would never be the same person again. I knew that I had to move on, to find a way to forgive myself and to build a new life, free from the shadows of the past.
Years passed. I never contacted them. They never contacted me. I heard through the grapevine that my mother got the maximum sentence. David's case was a little more complex, but he wouldn't see daylight for decades. I visited my father's grave. I placed flowers on the cold stone. I whispered, "It's done now." They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.